So the presentation about me and the work we're doing, it felt pretty complete, so I will just talk a little longer, okay? So I come from the Gapminder Foundation, and we're a small educational foundation based in Sweden, and we started in 2005, and as she was saying, it was me, my husband Ola, and my father-in-law Hans. And just to give you a brief understanding how we got started on this, Hans was a medical doctor and a professor in global health, and he was teaching students about the world. And he always wanted them to get sort of the overview before they started to look into the details, and it was so tricky, but he was working on that. Meanwhile, me and Ola, who met when we were 16, we both wanted to be very cool artists or work in the cultural sector. So I wanted to become a photographer or an artist, and I wanted to do, very hard to grasp kind of artworks, video performances, stuff like that. And Ola, he was about in the same business, but in theater and building abstract, weird sculptures and stuff. So that was what we were doing. But then his father, and also my main goal in life when I was young was to be independent. I would never marry, I would never get kids. That was the key. And I would do this very hard to grasp arts and be very interesting. Unfortunately, I met my husband when I was 16. We dropped out of doing this cultural stuff because his father was so charismatic and he had so big problems that we couldn't help ourselves but trying to work together with him and make them easier to understand. And now I have 3 kids and been married since I was 21. So the complete failure, that's the background. But it has been so fun, so it has been hard not to. So, as she was saying in the introduction, Gapminder Foundation tries to work for a fact-based worldview everyone can understand. And it sounds pretty bombastic, I guess, and pretty easy, but it's very important. Every single part here is important. One is to actually be fact-based, because it's so important that we know the global trends and the global proportions so we know what we're doing. We also it's important to communicate so that everyone can understand, because there is so much knowledge, but it's hard to actually grasp and get the overall picture. We very often get these very single stories. And Gapminder, we have 3 mega misconceptions that we have been trying to work around all the time since we started. And one is that people tend to think that the world is divided in 2. People tend to think that the world is getting worse all the time, not saying that everything is perfect, but we have this tendency to think that things are getting worse. And people tend to think that the world population just increases. The world population is increasing indeed, but we have underlined, bold, and made it italic that we are talking about the just, because there are some ideas in the UN explaining why it will not continue forever. So to do that, if we want to be fact-based, we need to use data. But as you know, it's pretty hard to communicate data like this. So we have tried different things. We've made these animating bubble charts. We have made these income distribution mountains. We have improved the search feature for public data. And we have made films, documentaries, and we have made TED Talks at Gapminder. And unfortunately, we ended up feeling unsatisfied, even if we've been doing and trying to basically communicate these mega misconceptions all the time in very many different formats. But what we realized is that we ourselves forgot to actually give people a view of what we considered being a fact-based worldview, because we hadn't written it down anywhere. We were just giving people some snippets of information, just like everybody else. So we decided to sit down and actually try to do that and put it all together. And that's when we wrote the book Factfulness. So in the writing process, when we had decided to do this, Hans Rosling unfortunately passed away because he got a cancer diagnosis pretty early on. But we finished it, me and my husband, so that's the thing. And the book then, it has, you could say, 3 different things it works around. First of all, we test what people know about the world. So we have 13 fact questions. It's actually the same questions we sent out to you. And then we have some frameworks that we think are actually pretty good to use to get the overall global proportions and trends right. And then we pack it all up in thinking habits, basically how we can start treat our dramatic instincts so that we have a better chance of understanding the world around us. And basically the dramatic instincts, if anyone would think, like, how do they relate to different biases, I would say, basically we have picked and chosen some biases, and instead of naming them as they are named, we just bunched them together to something we felt were meaningful for talking about these global trends. So it's like a homemade simplification. And usually we talk about what is Gapminder doing. We do vulgar simplifications, trying to get the overall somewhat easier to understand. So let's go to the questions. I'm going to show you 2 questions that you were answering here. One of them was, global climate experts believe that over the next 100 years, the average temperature will get warmer, stay the same, or get colder. Not all of you were answering. It was 170 or something. So you who didn't, you have a chance to do it still, and I can send out the results to you in detail later. But the right answer here is that the global climate experts, they believe the climate will get warmer. And we have asked this question in 14 countries, asking 12,000 people in representative samples, and this is the results. And we can see Hungary being at the top here, 94% got it right. In Sweden, where I come from, only 82. And this might feel like a communication disaster, but I would tell you, compared to the other results we got on the other question, this is the success story. Actually, a majority of the population do know that the climate is expected to become warmer. So, what about you then? You're here at the bottom, if you see. Let's see how you did. Wonderful, right? You're outperforming Hungarians and Norwegians. So that's very good. So let's go to the next question then. How many of the world's 1-year-old children today have been vaccinated against some disease? Is it 20%, 50%, or 80%? You can see that they are very different, these results, right? 80% is actually the correct number, and it's even higher, it's 88%, but we have rounded it downwards so no one can say that we are exaggerating. And this is how the results are now. You see, it's not as impressive anymore. So as soon as we leave negative trends and sort of environment questions that are negative, we start to get very bad results. So here we see Sweden at the top, but it's still only 21%, which is not very impressive. So this is why we usually tend to talk about the chimpanzees at this point. So if we were at a zoo, giving the same question to a chimp, you have 3 answering alternatives. It's A, B, or C. The chimp would grab one. They cannot hear and understand the question, so they would just go for any of the bananas, and then, by random, they should end up here. This is where we are supposed to be if we're just wildly guessing. But no one does, because we have a skewed worldview that make us pick the most negative results, and that is a very systematic thing we have seen. So then we wonder, what about you then? So now you're sort of competing with the chimp that cannot read the question. And I bet all of you are highly educated and smart people. That's why you're here, right? So it's a bit, yeah, I don't know if the prestige is now at stake. But let's see how you're doing. 17%, right? But as you can see, you're almost at the top. So you're still performing very good compared to all the others. Compare with France and Germany and Japan here with only 6%. So this is what the book is all about. We're trying to ask these questions just so that it becomes obvious that we walk around in a knowledge society and we think we have it all clear in mind and know what the world is like, but we are guessing and we have preconceived ideas about the world. So we've been asking this question at some conferences in other places, just to show you. Now you can just relax and see others performing not as good. This is the World Health Summit that was in Germany a year ago. Ola was talking there after Angela Merkel, and observe, this is actually a vaccination question, right? So you could assume that World Health Summit, the world's leader in the health area, would perform better than a chimp. But that is what we tend to do. Highly intelligent and highly educated people, we tend to overestimate what we know about things we are actually not really have the knowledge about. And we tend to think that our topic is way worse than it is often. So at Davos, they also had the bad luck of being tested. And a meeting in Lindau. Yeah, I know, this is pretty nice, right? But now I saved the best for last. So this is one of the largest banks. It was a meeting in London, and we signed an NDA that we were not allowed to disclose who they were. And I would actually say that was a pretty smart move of them. That was before the test, because this is the result, 4%. So, I mean, just imagine, all of us, we tend to be pretty wrong about the world, even though we think we know it pretty well. And I think that is very important. We need to be humble and curious to understand the world around us. This is just so you get an idea. So, of all the people who were answering these questions in these 14 countries, 15% got no question correct at all. And I mean, that in itself is pretty impressive. Being able to choose from 12 ABC questions and manage to get none of them correct, right? And this is how the results were after that. 4, that is what you would have gotten if you would have not read any of the questions. So humanity here is not very impressive at this point. The good thing, though, if we compete with the chimps, is that we can actually relearn, and it's not hard. It doesn't require some super brains. We can actually learn. It's just basic knowledge and facts, very easy. So we can actually, with small, simple steps, move ahead while the chimp will get stuck. So we can outperform it. One person got 11 right, and nobody got 12. That was what happened. So basically, 10% of the people answering our question was better than a chimp, not reading the questions at all. So that's pretty sad. Whoops, this is... Now I'm gonna have to see what I've done here. Now you see the slide, but it has a stupid animation revealing in a very strange way. This is supposed to be you. I click a few times and see if we find you here. Yes, this is you actually. Sorry for the bad animation. But this is, so forget it started like this. This is you actually. So you were actually way better than the average, but you could still sort of move a little bit, I think, for the future. So how come can we be this bad off? Well, we tend to think that the world is a pretty bad place, and we tend to think that it's getting worse. So just to show you, I'm going to show you 32 things that has actually improved over time. We're not saying that everything is getting good or that everything is good, but there are a lot of things actually becoming better that we tend to not hear about. So to do a quick walkthrough, we have legal slavery going down. It's more unlikely to die in natural disasters. Lead in gasoline is almost gone in all countries. Fewer children are dying. Fewer planes are crashing, and when they're crashing, fewer people die. There are many more new movies. More kids being immunized. We have much more music to choose from. We can see that a bigger portion of the earth is actually protected nature. So there are a lot of good things going on. But what do we see when we look out the window? Nothing is happening. It's like, things are like they are usually. It's very hard to see big global trends in proportion by just looking out the window. It doesn't work. So then we go to the news, maybe TV. And what do we see if we go there? Well, then we see disasters. We see war, we see refugees, we see horrible diseases, nice beaches, cute animals, and strange cultures. Basically, cultures we're fascinated by, but we don't really get what they are doing. And then we try to form a worldview, but the problem is that everything we see are extraordinary events. And I mean, of course, it should be in a way, because news is reporting about what's going on that is not the common thing, right? But it's a very bad way of forming a worldview. So imagine the world as a street where the poorest live to the left and the richest to the right, and everybody else somewhere in between. We have asked Swedish students where they think they belong, and they think here. This is the world income distribution, and Swedes put themselves in the middle. But by just living in Sweden, you're basically one of the seven, belonging to the richest billion in the world. And how can you understand the world? By looking at the news, looking out the window, and thinking that you are in the middle of the global income distribution when you're actually at top. It's pretty hard. So Dollar Street is a concept we started where we actually have photographers go and see how people really live and everyday lives. So we look at beds, we look at how people cook, toys, and so forth. And it looks like this, and I'm just going to show you briefly. This is not Dollar Street. I need to find my cursor. It's hidden. Now it's here. As you can see here, we have families, it says here, and then we have poor families to the left, richer to the right, and we can see a distribution. And you can see all small dots here are basically homes we have been to. So we've been to more than 350 homes in 52 countries, I think, at the moment. Might sound like a lot, but it's just a minor fraction of what we really would like to get. We are looking for at least 10 homes per country in the whole world, and we're hoping to go back to the same GPS coordinates every 5 to 10 years and see what's happening. So I mean, it's the starting point of something that we hope a lot of people will help us collaborate to actually create. So what we can do now, here we see the different families, and they are not ordered by where they are in the world, but by income. So we can, for instance, go here and we can look at beds. And then we click and we can see beds immediately. So this is what beds can look like. And everything is free. Everything we do is free. So anyone can take and use and, take pictures and so on. And anyone can also collaborate and add homes, which we would love. So here we can then filter here visually to see only beds in the middle income segment on the world income distribution. And when we see this and ask Swedish students, is this what your bedroom looks like? It's not, I can tell you. And we can go down, and it's not like this either. So if we go up to the upper end, suddenly they start to feel more at home. And here you can see bedrooms from India, France, Brazil, Netherlands, US, and so forth. So you have bedrooms from a lot of different places. We can do the same for, toilets, which is one of my favorites. Yes, I know. That's the best part with defining your own products. Like, hey, we need to go and look at toilets. We also have toilet paper as a category, so we have it all. And then we can look and see here, we see toilets from a lot of different places. They are white, and you can actually flush all of them, right? About the same kind of tools. But we're still just filtering at the top, right? So we can now actually move out to see a more representative image of toilets in the world. Basically trying to get the full picture and getting the gradual change more correctly. Yeah, so you sort of get the idea. But what we can also do, we could go to, let's go to stove, for instance. Yeah, we can of course look at stoves and so on. And we can filter. We can go to Romania here, and we can see we have a few homes. We need more, just saying. No, we didn't have very many stoves there. Sorry, that was a bad thing. Let's go for homes like this. But hey, is it my filtering or is it a bug? It's probably a bug. That's very bad. I don't like bugs. Let's see. No. Now it's better, right? And we can zoom out so we can get all of them on the same row. It's easier to see. So here are 5 different families we've been to so far. And just going and looking at the different things within these homes. Let's go for, what should we go for? Computers, for instance, and see. You see the idea. We can go around and browse like this. And we can actually, since late yesterday, we actually can get it in Roman Romanese? What do you call it? Romanian, of course, Romanian. I was Romanese. Romanian. So we can actually see everything in Romanian, which is pretty cool. And we can go like this, and we can read about the families, and we can, we can visit the family and so forth. So it's basically, right now, it's the biggest database of everyday life, I think, that exists. And it's a very tiny portion of what we're hoping to get by actually getting people on board and helping us adding more homes. That is what we're dreaming about, to have this like a live environment. But you sort of get the idea. So here are the Romanian version, and we have had people helping us out. And if you're helping us out, the good thing is that you will actually, let's see if I can find it now. I'm too sweaty, so I can't use my touchpad. But then you will actually end up here in our database and so forth. So please do. But not everything works as photos. We also need to know things about the families to place them on the street. So we have a questionnaire where we ask a lot of questions about the family and the house and so forth. And we also take some videos of everyday functions. So here, this one we got pretty late, so it doesn't really fit on the street. It's Bill Gates in his own bathroom brushing his teeth. So unfortunately, he breaks the model a bit so I put his house on the end, but it should probably be, further out. But he wanted to add to this one that we had made previously, where we can now see people brushing their teeth on different income levels. And we see everyone here using a plastic toothbrush and toothpaste, because it's a universal thing to brush our teeth. And people are doing it everywhere. Some are very serious, but except for that, we're just doing it, right? And it's a very durable and cheap product, the plastic toothbrush. But when we come down to the poorer end, you will start seeing people not affording the plastic toothbrushes anymore, and they will start to use a stick or their finger or something. So this image, this woman, she's brushing, she's scraping up from the wall behind her and mixes with water as a toothpaste. Therefore, we tag this one not only as her wall, but also as her toothpaste. Because if you're poorer, you will reuse the few things you have for so many different things. So we try to create this sort of practical framework. Let's see here. We zoom in on the street and we look at the US. We have visited a home in the richer end of the income distribution in the US, the Howards. Here's their home. And we have been visiting a family in the lower end, the Hadleys. And looking into their cutlery drawers, we see this huge difference depending on if you're in the richer and the poorer end of the street. We can add another family in the middle and see the gradual change of cutlery drawers. By just using photos as data, we can actually learn things about everyday life in the world. The kitchen sinks or the living rooms. By just looking at them, seeing they have so many stuff here, while they are having at the top, and the Howards are more like a lounge. So that tells us that they have many rooms with different functions, while here we have all the functions in one place. We can see the same in China. Homes, sofas, and stoves. And very often when we talk about people in other countries, we tend to group them by, that's how they do it in China, or that's the Chinese culture. But look at this. So many different ways, of course, depending on your income. I mean, it's very basic, but it's pretty good to remember that. And if we compare China and the US, two homes neighbors at the Dollar Street, but not in reality, the Wus and the Howards, looking into their bedrooms, looks quite the same. Both have brown leather sofas, and they have similar play structures, both made in China, of course. And then we can go down to the other end, and we can compare two homes, two families in Nigeria and China in the lower end. Looking at this image, it doesn't look like they have so much in common, does it? But look at their ceiling, their sofas, how they are storing their grains, what they're going to eat for dinner, and how they are boiling their water. The cultural stereotypes we tend to have about people, usually falls apart when we start looking by income, because those two homes in Nigeria and China, they have so many things in common, even though they are in completely different parts of the world. So when we are saying all the time that that's how they do it in Nigeria, this is the typical Chinese way of cooking, it's a bit ridiculous, right? And looking in Dollar Street, the world doesn't look like the world we see in the news. We don't see the extraordinary, we focus on everyday life of normal people. Sometimes people tell me, but isn't it an unnecessary hassle to actually send out photographers and do it in the systematic way? Why don't you just crowdsource? So I just want to remind you what it looks like if we're going for the same categories: toilet, bed, stove, for instance. I mean, it's not that those are lying. And as we see very many of them, our brains will think that they are representative for how toilets look in the world, or stoves. But I think this is the important thing. If we Google, we will see what the top 10% either have or would like to get next. So it doesn't really give us the worldview. So to understand the world, we should think about the world as 4 levels. Here are the 7 billion people of the world. 1, 3, 2, 1. This is how the population is distributed. And looking at what it means to live on these different levels, roughly we could say, if you're on level 1, if you're going to move somewhere, you have to walk. Level 2, you will have a bike. Level 3, you will have a motorbike. And level 4, you will have some kind of access to a car. It doesn't mean you have a car, but you can get a car or a taxi or whatever if you need to. Just roughly, to get an idea what life is like. And within the same country, you can have people living on all these different levels, and it's more meaningful than talking about national averages. And where do people live then? Well, the 7 billion again, 1 billion in America, 1 in Europe, 1 in Africa, and 4 in Asia. This is where people live, roughly. So you can think of it as a pin code of the world. 1114, pretty easy to remember. I can go back. I see some, if you want the pin code. But you could remember this one because it's so easy. And this is what the UN is expecting will happen next. There will be more people, and they will not come here. Not in the Americas, not in Europe. It will happen in Asia and especially Africa. So splitting Americas and Europe into the classical West, this is the small fraction of the world population in the future. We will be 8% of the world population, roughly, because this is where everything will happen most likely. So just keeping that in mind makes it easier to sort of understand the world. So the pin code in the future would probably be 1145. It might be slight differences, but roughly, right? So that is the kind of frameworks we're working on. But how can we beat the chimp then? Hans was always saying, because his biggest passion was to learn things about the world. So he spent his spare time reading, thinking, learning about countries and so on, and history. And we always said that that's of course fun for you, but there are people who like to do other things on their spare time. And he didn't really get that because he thought it was just because they hadn't gotten started, so they didn't really get how fun it was. But me and Ola were more like, yeah, but still maybe we need to help people to learn without having to spend too much time. And by the way, the world is changing. So if we learn by heart today, in 5 to 10 years, things will have changed. So we have to relearn. And therefore, we started thinking more and more, how can we help people to sort of understand the world more easily without having to spend huge amounts of time learning by heart? So first of all, you will need some facts and frameworks, which makes it easier when you read the news to remember to put it in a context, to understand the bigger picture. But most of all, you need to control your instincts. And what we call instincts, basically biases that we have sort of, shaped ourselves, defined ourselves. But control your instincts. And I'm going to show you what we mean by that. So we have created something we call the Factfulness rules of thumb. And it might look a bit complicated, I don't know, but I'm going to take you through it very, very quickly. So the first one is the gap instinct. I will show it once again, the image, so you will see it soon. But the gap instinct, basically, we always hear about stories and like stories with conflict. Poor and rich, good and bad, all these. We like it. But every time we hear stories like that, we should always remind ourselves to locate the majority, because very often we forget to say anything about the majority. So just by reminding us about that, I think it will help us to get a better picture, remembering we will hear about outliers all the time. We hear that everything is getting worse. We hear stories about things declining and getting worse. But we should remember that an improvement would most likely not get publicity. And just reminding ourselves about that will also help us to sort of see it in a light that makes it better. We never see news like this. Yesterday, all trains were on time again. The timetable is slightly improved, and no plane crashes today either. I mean, we don't hear that. It's not the logic of the news. But we have to have sort of an image of that in our brains so that we can compensate and remember what's happening. And I usually think, it's so fantastic. Think about how thin newspapers are, and they cover basically everything that happens all over, and they are not like this. So that's something, at least. Then we tend to think when we see a line, our brains fill it out. So we continue into the future like this. But very many lines bend. And they bend in many different ways. And just by remembering that, it also helps us keep on track. A lot of stories are driven by fear. But we must remember to calculate the risks. It might not be a crocodile, it can be a key, kind of. So when we see a spider, it freaks us out very often. But the cars are actually the thing that will kill us. Size is another thing. We tend to have a problem remembering the proportions of things. We hear it's a huge problem. We hear it all the time. But we must remember to compare and divide. A single number we cannot use. For instance, UNICEF published this number. In year 2016, 4,489,000 infants died. I mean, it's a horrible number, isn't it? It's hard to imagine this 4 million small kids actually dying. But in 2015, it was actually worse. And in 1950, it was much worse. So we have to compare to actually make sense of the numbers. We cannot relate to single numbers. As soon as we look at global things, the numbers will be big, and it's hard for our brains to actually digest. So always remember to put it in a context. Then we have the generalization. This is a very classical one, that we tend to group things, and be stereotypical and so forth. But we should, of course, be careful doing that. I mean, it's very obvious. But here, for instance, we all have seen these boats, rubber boats coming over the seas, trying to reach Europe. And it's so easy to group these people as being the same, the immigrants or so on, while it's a very diverse group. But I saw recently a news in an article in a Spanish newspaper that I really enjoyed reading. I have only read the very brief details, and this is one of these cheesy ones, but I really like it. There was an article, this one. One of these immigrant boats actually ended up on a nudist beach at Gran Canaria, and suddenly we have this clash of people actually, risking their lives to come to Europe. And this is the Europe they meet. Nude pink men. And I wonder how well represented we all feel by these men, because that is their first impression coming to Europe. And would they really think it was worth the trip, right? I think it's very fascinating. So if I could have known more about this story, I would have loved to. At this moment, I don't know anything more, but it's a wonderful clash, I think. And then we have the destiny, that we tend to think that things and cultures and countries are very static. But most of them are actually moving, but they are moving slowly. So we basically don't notice the changes. And we have also our ideology, that we have a set of ideas we really like, and then we tend to look for information that fits with our ideologies. But of course, it would be much better if we can actually look at the more, using different tools. We have the blame instinct also. We really much like to blame people, but as soon as we find someone to blame, it's a huge risk we stop thinking. And when we do not think, we are not very good at actually making decisions and decide things. So there can be other explanations, but our brains sort of shut off as soon as we found someone to blame. And then finally, we have the urgency instinct, now or never, where we tend to feel that, with a lot of stress, that I have to do something drastic in this moment, otherwise it will be too late. But most often, we can take one step at a time, and we should wait until we feel a bit more relaxed before we actually make these huge decisions, because otherwise we might make the wrong decisions. So these are sort of the rules of thumb that we're hoping could actually help people to make it a habit to control their own dramatic instincts that leads to an overdramatic worldview that makes us guess completely wrong when we get fact questions about the world. Because when we get this question, we have no idea about the answer, we tend to pick the worst off. And that doesn't really correspond to the world. So overall, you could say the world is not perfect, it's not good, there are huge problems out there, but when we think the things that are actually going well are also problems, there's a huge risk we can't focus on the biggest risks and problems that we need to change. So maybe on the news, we might need, like we have on the cigarettes, have a warning sign, so that we actually remind ourselves that we should sort of relax and have a helpline. You've seen that on the cigarettes, maybe. There's a helpline so that you can actually get help quit smoking. We're not saying stop reading the news, because you shouldn't, but you should maybe try to remember that what you hear will be the extraordinary stories, of course, because that is what the news is and maybe should be, right? So trying to calm ourselves to behave to sort of handle the news around us. And if you want to do the same test you did at the beginning, if you want to get a diploma like this, you can go to our website, and there you have a link on the first page, gapminder.org, where you can do the test. And if you score 100% correct, you can do it several times, so don't worry. But if you score 100% correct, and we don't save your information unless you want the diploma, because we need to send it to someone, right? But if you score 100% correct, you will get the diploma in your inbox, just so you know. And we have done this. We have actually met with the news reporters in Sweden and actually certified them. And this is what we think will happen next. We've been to schools and so on. And we would like to certify organizations, schools, companies, and so on, and actually make sure that they have at least some knowledge about the sort of global world out there. And I think that is probably a pretty smart thing to do. And we really need your help. So the whole Gapminder approach, everything is free, so you can just go there and grab whatever you need for whatever purposes. We do have our tools. I can just show you here. We do have all our tools here, where you can actually just play with data and see how it's moving over time and so forth. I didn't even show you, that's pretty bad, but I had prepared, so I could have shown you. And we can see how population is moving out of extreme poverty. This is way back in the 1800s. The four colors are the four big regions of the world. You see the map up in the corner. And you can see here, most people in the world are actually in extreme poverty. But gradually, you can see Europe and US are moving out. We have a divided world. But then, look what's happening recently. Look, Asia, how it's coming. And look, Africa, actually a huge portion is moving out of poverty. So we do have all these tools, and it's possible to input your own data into them too. So if you have a local context and your own data, it would be lovely if you would actually, you just go and we can help you figure out how you can do it if you don't manage on your own. And for the Dollar Street, I mean, we truly mean it. We need at least 10 homes per country in the whole world. We've been to 300 homes, and we need to go to about 2,000 homes. So please help us there too. And there's another thing, because we tend to create more infrastructure and try to tell stories on data and try to talk about sort of the global pictures, but we need others to tell stories using our data too, because I think these data sets could actually be meaningful in many ways to give a context, even if you talk about something precise. So feel free to use anything. And a lot of the information we have is not translated to all countries' languages, but we would like to do that too. So if you have any languages or any photos or any stories, please feel free to just use everything without talking to us, that's fine too, or collaborate with us and we make the stories together. So, yes, so welcome to do things with us if you want to. We're a very tiny foundation, but we would really like to have people like you doing things together with us. Thank you so much. Thanks.